The Shabbat, the parsha follows Jacob as he returns to his family's land in Canaan. And this trip comes with quite a great deal of human emotion, of fear and of anxiety. And for Jacob, coming home means that he is seeing his family again, including his brother Esau, whom Jacob fled after stealing his birthright. And now it is 20 years later, and Jacob prepares to face his brother for the first time. And though before the brothers formally reunite, as we just heard from Rabbi Helfman, that Vaishlach records this famous story of Jacob wrestling with a cryptically written ish, a man. And the commentators likewise wrestle with trying to understand who exactly is this ish. Is it an angel of God? Is it perhaps Esau himself? Perhaps it is God. Or perhaps it is some anxiety-induced stress stream in which Jacob is wrestling with his conscience. And in any case, his name is changed from Yaakov to Yisrael, the one who wrestles with God. And we learn that Jacob is wounded, and yet he is made stronger by his encounter. And it's really quite important to remember who this Jacob character is and why it is so interesting that he is physically engaged in a wrestling match before meeting his brother Esau. Rabbi Rick Jacobs reminds us that Jacob is a bit of a yeshiva bacher. He is the guy who loves to sit in the library. He is the guy who absolutely loved religious school as a kid. He is the man of the tent. He's happiest when reading and studying. So going outside and hunting and getting into a physical altercation is not so typical of the Jacob that we know. And so here is our Jacob, wrestling with all of his might and finding his strength, finding both his inner strength as well as his outer strength to wrestle in a super intense way. And shortly after this struggle that leaves him forever changed, Jacob reaches a height of anxiety in preparation to meet his brother. He fears Esau's vengeance just as much as the day that he fled his home. And the first thing that Jacob tries to do, even before this wrestling match, is to inform Esau that he is coming, that Jacob's camp approaches. And so Jacob sends messengers and refers to Esau as my lord Esau. And he refers to himself as Esau's servant. And as we know in the society in which they lived, the firstborn would have had superior status in the house, would have had the primary inheritance of the father. But by stealing the birthright, Jacob had undermined this power structure, and some scholars argue that by using these hierarchical ideas, these hierarchical titles of servant and lord, that Jacob is, in a way, trying to address the proper power dynamics in their house, even though his actions have permanently altered them. And so what happens? Jacob's messengers inform him that Jacob's messengers inform him that Jacob approaches, and that Esau is now coming to meet Jacob accompanied with 400 men. And these motives are unknown to Jacob. Do they come in peace? Do they come to make war? And it is written that Jacob was terrified, so distressed was he. And we can imagine that Jacob was afraid because he had considered every possible outcome of the situation. He had tricked his brother, and for the first time, he was about to have to live with the real world consequences of his actions. And the Midrash Bereshit Rabbah offers a deeper insight into Jacob's fearful state of mind, writing, Rav Yehuda Bar Elai asked, "Are not fear and distress identical? Why record both words?" The meaning, however, is that he was afraid lest he should be slain by his brother, and he was distressed lest he would have to slay himself. For he thought, if Esau proves stronger than I, he might kill me. And if I prove stronger than he, I might have to kill him. And so while this example is a bit extreme, I believe it is also incredibly telling of the nature of Jacob's humanity. We all do this in one form or another, and Jacob is nothing but human. Thinking through all possible outcomes, we stress about each individual possibility and planning as best as we can to work through each scenario. It is how we deal with the uncertainty of the future. We plan ahead, knowing that some of our plans will never come to fruition and perhaps will never even be necessary. And so the great Torah commentator Rashi explains how Jacob handles his fear and anxiety. Rashi writes that Jacob prepares. Jacob prepared to meet Esau in 3 different ways. First, he sent a gift. Second, he prayed. And third, Jacob prepares for war. And according to Rashbam, Rashi's grandson, even though Esau had demonstrated to the messengers that he intended to treat Jacob with respect, Jacob did not believe that Esau had good intentions. And so Jacob decides to split his household, sending half one route and half the other, with the rationale that if Esau attacks, at least we'll have survivors. And the next day, in hopes of appeasement, Jacob sends a large gift of livestock, over 550 animals in total. And his running dialogue, this is quite interesting. He has this running dialogue of rationale which is recorded in the Torah. It's quite different from most other types of Torah that we read. And it is written that Jacob reasoned that I will win over him with an offering in advance, and then when I face him, he will pardon me. And by evening, Jacob worries that Esau might still attack his half of the group in the middle of the night. And so Jacob sends his wives and his children and the rest of the camp across the river, leaving Jacob completely alone. And it is in this solitude where Jacob wrestles with the Ish. And in the morning, when Jacob sees Esau and his 400 men approaching, he arranges his family in a defensive position, and he himself goes out far in front of the rest of the group. You can see this act of positioning and of war preparation, and he sends himself out first in front of the rest of the group, and in a last attempt of appeasing his brother, he bows down to the ground 7 times. So Jacob's actions alone clearly demonstrate the fear of his brother. And if his actions do not speak volumes enough on their own, the Torah takes it one step further and directly addresses the human emotional experience. And it is rare that the Torah tells us exactly what a character is feeling, what's going on in their head, which makes it all the more telling when the Torah says bluntly that Jacob was terrified, that he was distressed, and we even know why. A few verses later, Jacob cries out, "Save me, I pray, from my brother's hand, from Esau's hand. I'm afraid of him, lest he advance on me and strike me." Yet after all of Jacob's preparation, all of his precaution, what does Esau actually do? Esau runs to meet Jacob. They embrace and they kiss and they burst into cheers. And later indicates that Esau said that I brought these 400 men for your protection, so that you could be guarded in your traveling. Esau even tells Jacob, "My brother, let what you have remain yours," which according to Rashi means that Esau has also fully accepted Jacob's possession of the birthright. All of Jacob's anxiety, all of his worry, all of the fear of meeting his brother were indeed unnecessary. For Esau felt almost exactly the opposite of which Jacob had feared. So what do we learn from the story? We can derive 2 competing lessons that are a bit at odds with one another. On the one hand, it is normal for us to be afraid and feel anxious when we are facing daunting situations, big or small. But we, like Jacob, can be prone to worry a bit too much. How many times have we been like Jacob, making plans and preparing countless contingencies for every possible outcome, thinking of all the ways something could go wrong, when all along, really, we had nothing to worry about? We can fixate on all the what-ifs. We put in a lot of time and energy into accounting for things that may or may not ever happen. Fear can be a useful emotion at times when it alerts us to danger and prepares us to take up the duty of self-defense. But fear can also lead us to misread cues and react defensively in situations, call for a hand outstretched in love to our fellow brother, to our fellow human being, rather than violence. And sometimes overthinking and becoming a ball of stress is really counterproductive. And on the other hand, exerting a great deal of time and energy preparing for all possible outcomes sends a message of love and respect to those who we are in relationship with. Planning for the future enriches our current relationships. Just as Jacob prepared for his encounter with his brother with gifts and prayer and preparation for war, we too can face our fear of the unknowable future with gifts and prayer and preparation. To our children, we give the gift of Torah and education. We impress upon them we care deeply about their future, and we build our societal structures in a way in order to give them access to what they need to be successful in the world as educated and ethical members of society. And thank God, families now have the ability, with children of the ages of 5 to 11, to give their children the gift of vaccination and protection from this virus. We can also find in prayer that it is a form of a gift that we give to ourselves, but it is also a spiritual endeavor that is lifting us up. When we make time for prayer or meditation, we are enhancing a relationship, a holy relationship that we have with ourselves. And we say prayers of healing, prayers of love for our friends and our family, creating these deeper connections, meaning in our lives. And finally, we are constantly preparing. And this should be viewed as a positive thing. Creating a plan of action for the worst case scenario shows others you care for them. Jacob does not want to go to war, but nevertheless, Jacob prepares for war because he must. And what message would it send if Jacob did not make this preparation? In the contemporary world, we too make preparations for realities we hope to never face. We have regular fire drills. More recently, and quite disturbingly, we hold active shooter drills, which reinforce that preparation for each and every scenario is important. What message would we be sending to our community and to our friends and family if we did not create these plans? Even though we prepare, the preparation is ultimately not needed occasionally. And the fear and the anxiety can feel unwarranted. But all of these uncomfortable emotions are still necessary in creating the type of relationship we need to have with our community. Preparation is necessary. So what is the appropriate way to handle our fears? Should we just relax a little and try to do a little less? Should we jump into overdrive and consider every single possible outcome? To be honest, I don't have an answer. Some days I find myself in the first camp of thought, trying my best to be calm, living fully in the present moment. In other situations, I am fully prepared to conquer each and every possible outcome with contingency plans A, B, and C prime, and C secondary. There is no one way. There is no one size fits all when dealing with the complexities of human emotion, of the anxiety of the unknown. So as we think back to Jacob, as we think and find him at the beginning of the Torah portion wrestling with this unknown being, we can see how this one little narrative speaks to the complexity of our lives. How Jacob, the man of the tent who just defeated a divine being in hand-to-hand, one-on-one combat, but now the thought of facing his brother is entirely overwhelming to him. So perhaps I'll conclude with a question. Who was it that Jacob battled? Was it an angel? Was it simply Ish, some man? Was it Esau? Was it Jacob's conscience? Perhaps it was all of them. Jacob needed to struggle with all of this in order for him to learn and grow, his inner struggle to come to grips with who he was, his outward fear to understand who his brother was, and his struggle with God to better understand his place in the world. As Rabbi Rick Jacobs writes, we should know when to hug and when to wrestle. And let's find the closeness of the two, because either way, you got to be right up and close to it. So this Shabbat, let's learn from Jacob and find our inner strength. Who does Jacob wrestle? And in a way, that is up to you. The text leaves it open. But for us, we know who we are and we know who we are becoming. We are Am Yisrael, the people of Jacob, the people of Israel. We might not always know the best path forward or how to prepare to move forward, but we are eternally the forward-moving people. Shabbat Shalom.